literally just heard about this, but it's not surprising. There was a guy running and walking up Deutsche and nasty accident, and unfortunately, not in a good condition, and it just kind of the day after I was doing a session where I would literally start from where we are right now in the university, run a couple of kilometers, and then start to climb up Deutsche and it's your typical kind of mountain road, which is windy, which means there's blind bends, which means you've got to be thinking, you've got to be conscious, you've got to be aware of your whole surroundings, whether you're on a bicycle, whether you're walking, whether you're running, and there's a way to do that. And I guess maybe as adults, if we kind of get into hiking, or we get into fitness, or we get into running or cycling, and we haven't had that background as a kid, then it's like learning to drive. It's going to take you a little bit longer later on in life in order to kind of figure out the mechanics, if you're only used to the road being a place where you drive a car on. And even with cyclists, I'll often have this argument, which is, when I learned to drive, I asked my dad to teach me how to drive, and he told me that I could learn to drive, pass my test, and then he would teach me how to drive. And I didn't quite understand. I kind of understood, but I didn't quite understand until after I'd passed my test and I had a driving lesson. Then he taught me things like, you're literally driving a 1 ton or 1,000 kilogram or 2,000 kilogram weapon, which is infinitely more dangerous than and fatal than a gun. And you're allowed to have that weapon with very, very little experience, if any, driving on your own, and amongst people, pedestrians, cyclists, other drivers, and at any moment you can make a mistake, have your kind of eye off the ball, and something terrible can happen and literally change the course of your life. That's as a driver. Yeah, so I had that instilled in me from an early age, being on a bicycle and going out on the roads. You know, we'd often go on the canals because it was safer, but then we'd go on the roads and he'd teach me kind of not just to indicate. Like, it's funny because drivers in certain countries don't indicate, but not just to indicate, but to make sure that you can see the eyeballs of the person that you are trying to go before, if that makes sense. So if I'm coming towards a junction, I want to turn right, and I'm on the left-hand side of the road, which is how we drive in Thailand and in the UK, then I don't just want to wait for that car to slow down and look as if he's slowing down, or even flash me. I want to see the eyeballs to see, has he seen me? Can I actually turn the car? And when you then get onto the bike and your protection is not a metal box like a car, but literally lycra, and lycra mixed with skin and bones and muscles, and a metal bike or a carbon bike, then that's a recipe for disaster, and it's not a situation you want to be in. So whether you're, and this is the argument I have with cyclists here, because a lot of people come to Chiang Mai for really good reasons. They come for rehabilitation reasons. They come to get into veganism, which is plenty of vegan restaurants here. It's a perfect place to become vegan or vegetarian. They start to kind of get the life in order in terms of like diet and training, and then they start to learn to ride a bike for the first time, and that can be in their mid-20s, mid-30s, and onwards. And if you've not learned the mechanics of how the road works, and you have to be submissive on a bike, and you have to be kind of you have to have 360 vision and be constantly aware of what's going on around you. And unless you've had that training, you're putting yourself in strange situations. Like I've seen people here who've had accidents, and there's literally chalk marks on the floor. They've described the accident, they've drawn a diagram, and there are many ways out of that situation without having to go to hospital. Whereas you can be in hospital and you can be completely in the right. So it's kind of like, I was in the right, I didn't do anything wrong, but you've got a broken femur. And it's not just the recovery and what that does to your psyche, but it's also the inconvenience of being away from the sport for so long. So you've got to keep all that into few fans passing by. It's the inconvenience of being like away from your training, away from the improvement curve, and just like the frustration of being in a bed, not being able to do anything. Like, you have to think about that. So when you're running, this is really important. Like when you're running, I would always, if there's a pavement or a sidewalk, I'd always run against the traffic. So if you're driving on the right side of the road in America, I would run facing the traffic. The traffic's very close to me, coming to me. So if that gets too close, or if it's going to make an accident and it's going to come onto the pavement, onto the sidewalk, you have got the last chance, you have got the last say on whether you live or die, or whether you get injured or don't get injured. You can jump out of the way at the last minute. It happened to me so many times when I've been running against the traffic that I've had that final say, because there's been no sidewalk, there's been no pavement, but I've had the last opportunity to literally dive out of the way. It's happened 4 or 5 times, and that's because you have to put yourself in the mind of a driver. A driver has got so much to think about, and this is not in defense of drivers. We're all drivers of cars and motorbikes, the vast majority of us, and then a cyclist, and then a runner. So it's not us versus them. It's kind of, how do we be considerate to people who are also sharing the road? But if you're in a car, you've got so much to think about, like the gears, the indicators, the steering wheel, the turns, the speed, the red lights, the kind of like dynamics of the road, etc. And then all of a sudden, like, and we're talking literally 1 in 1,000, there's a cyclist there, and you've got to approach that cyclist, and then you've got to understand that that cyclist is probably traveling at 25 to 35 kilometers an hour. You're traveling at 60 kilometers an hour. How does that work? And that cyclist is quite unpredictable, because those little movements can mean a meter, but can be the difference between life and death. So you've got to put yourself in the driver's driver's mindset in terms of what they're doing. And it's funny, my favorite comedian said, you know, I was driving Los Angeles and kind of looking around, looking at properties, etc., and all of a sudden he gets like slam on the window, and he has to open the window, and the cyclist goes, "What the fuck are you doing? Like, do you know?" And he's like, he says, I'm doing exactly what you'd be doing if you were driving in Los Angeles, not paying attention. And that is the mindset. It's funny because it's a comedian, and it's funny because it's true. Like, most drivers are not thinking about every possible thing that can go wrong on the road. They're not thinking about walkers, runners, cyclists. So if you're walking up or running up with the traffic right behind you, literally passing you by inches every time it goes past, then of course you're going to run into problems. And of course, you know, somebody could be going around the bend, somebody coming the opposite ways a little bit further over the line, and that person has to quickly save his car, save the people in the car and the people in that car, and you're the victim. Then you're in a hospital bed. You've done nothing wrong, but you're in a hospital bed. And again, it's the inconvenience of being in that hospital bed and not being able to get to your training, and not being able to get to what you love, and literally becoming a different person, because that can take years, if not months, to fix and sort out. So super important. You can't be vigilant. If I'm running up Doisetep, anything that's coming up behind me, I'm right over on the left hand side. Because it's so windy, it's not possible to run against the traffic. I definitely suggest you don't do that. And if you're gonna try to like go for the course record like I have in the past, and you can look back at videos and see where somebody's filmed me going for the course record up Doisetep, yeah, we've taken the race line and we've crossed that center line, but there's always been a cyclist in front of me who's been telling me whether it's safe to go or not. Yeah. And so if you're walking up or running up, just be so aware that if you go around a sharp bend, you are invisible for 20 or 30 meters. At least you're invisible. At least 20 or 30 meters, you're invisible. Yeah. So you've got to be concentrating all the time, especially when you're around like essentially 2,000 kilogram weapons that can literally change the direction of your life forever, if not worse.